Okay, so I am finally able to get out on the water to give this Exsence DC SS a whirl and see what it can do casting wise. And more importantly, we're going to see what it can do casting wise running the line that it was designed to run, which is braid. Now the braid I'm using is this cheap budget braid I found on eBay. It's 40 pound. I think the brand is called Hercules. And since it's so, I guess, affordable, I'm gonna assume that the coloring is probably gonna bleed all over this reel within just a few casts, but oh well. Now the rod I'm running it on is a 6'9" JDM JACKALL BPM medium heavy that's rated from 1/4 ounce to 1 ounce. And I think it's more like a fast, moderate fast taper. So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to basically try to cast in all of the line modes, including the fluoro, and we're going to be running, I guess, a 1/4 ounce lure as well as a 1/2 ounce lure. And we're not going to go any lower than that because obviously this reel is not designed for finesse fishing. Okay, so we're going to start off with just this Heddon Spook Junior Topwater. Now, of course, this is not a reel that I personally would run for topwater, especially a walking the dog style lure, but I want the lure to float because this place is super snaggy. Now I'm going to set the spool tension up to just minimize the side-to-side play, and it feels super weird being a lefty reel. You got to turn everything the opposite way. Okay, so I finally just minimized the side-to-side play on that spool tension. It's way harder than I thought it'd be, being left-handed. And we're gonna start off in braid mode number 3. So this should be the strongest break profile of the braid settings. So here we go. Gonna have to get used to casting braid because it's been a while, but let's see what this Exsence can do. Shit, that went out farther than expected. That was just a little lob cast. Spool, of course, was definitely controlled. Once again, this retrieve is just, it's a totally different feel than the CURADO DC. It's definitely more precise and has a more, I guess, precision feel to it. Better tolerances, I should say. Okay. So let's do a couple more and then I'm gonna really try to heave into some long casts. Shit, that went out there like 45 yards. I saw a couple of loops. I wanna make sure I'm on level 3. Yep, break setting 3. All right, let's do a super long cast. Shit, I didn't stop the spool once the lure hit the water, but it was still pretty well behaved. All right, I'm still trying to get used to the non-stretch characteristics of this braid when casting, but I'm quickly getting the hang of it. All right, let's do one more long cast on braid setting 3. Okay, so it's going out there once again about 40 to 45 yards. Spool very controlled. Wow, this feels so weird reeling in lefty. Okay, so far so good on break mode number 3. I'm really surprised the color is just not bleeding off of this braid. Okay, let's go to braid setting 2. Okay, this should give us a little bit less braking force, and this should be the optimal setting for this weight of a lure, which I think is around 1/2 ounce or a little bit more. Okay, so distance was about the same as braid setting 2. I didn't see anything. It didn't really seem to go any further. All right, let's see if we can go any further. Oh shit. I don't know if you guys saw that, but I thought that splash of that fish was the lure hitting the water, so I stopped that cast short, but it actually wasn't. Damn it, I'm gonna do that one over. Okay, here we go. Okay, so distance is about the same as braid setting 3. Let me just make sure I'm on braid setting 2. Yep, I'm on 2. Spool still very controlled. So let's go down to braid setting number 1 and see what's what. Okay, we're going to braid setting number 1. This is for really, really heavy lures. And I'm gonna be monitoring that spool as this lure is flying through the air, see what it's doing. But here we go. All right, spool was very controlled. Didn't see any kind of loops or coils or anything, and the distance was about the same. And maybe this lure is just not that heavy to be able to really bomb it out there. I feel that I am getting good casts. Doesn't look like the lure is tumbling through the air or helicoptering. All right, we'll do a couple more on braid setting 1, and that's it. You can't go any lower than the number 1 setting. Yeah, I mean, distance maybe just a few feet farther, but not that much different than braid setting 2 or 3. That is strange. I wonder if David experienced the same thing when he's casting this reel around. All right, so I'm going to shuffle back and forth from fluoro all the way back to the number 1 setting. Let's cast a few more times in the number 1 setting. Here we go. Yeah, I mean, it's decently long, but it doesn't seem like it's any longer than what any other DC reel could do, like the Scorpion, or maybe just any other standard reel, because most reels can bomb a topwater. All right, we'll do 2 more casts, 2 more. Let me see if I can squeeze out any extra distance, but it seems like the brakes are really limiting me here. All right, so that might have been the longest cast yet, but you know, once again, it's not really making my eyes pop. All right, guys, 1 more cast, and then we are going to try out the fluorocarbon mode using braided line. And once again, I'm impressed that this line is not bleeding color all over the place. Once again, Hercules braided line on eBay. I think this is supposed to be an 8 strand. Okay, here we go. Boom. Now that was a nice, I guess, more of a rainbow style cast because it was in the air a long time. And the spool, not a hint of overrun. Man, it's so awkward fishing a lefty reel. Okay, we're gonna do 1 more. And I'm purposely tilting this reel on the side, hopefully in order to let you guys check out the spool in action during these casts. And I'm gonna try to do a nice long line drive cast. Here we go. All right. So interesting, because in the braid mode of the Scorpion DC, I mean, going down to the number 1 setting, even with this lure here, was pretty much a no-go. But with Exsence, it is definitely controllable. It's almost like it needs 1 step lower, like a brake setting 0, to be able to get more distance out of this thing. Okay, so I'm gonna switch it back to 3 real quick, do a few casts on that, and see if there's a real difference in distance now that I'm warmed up and used to this braided line. I mean, it is just a tad shorter, but like maybe like probably less than 5 foot. So very interesting with this Exsence DC. It is very controlled. It's like the spool is just not phased by anything. Okay, so we're gonna go to the fluorocarbon mode now, just to see what it can do. Okay, so man, that casted pretty long. And I saw maybe like 1 or 2 coils there. Of course, fluorocarbon being the most unmanageable line, the fluorocarbon mode should be the most heaviest braked. And I think the way that Shimano programs it is that the max braking kicks in at a different spot than, let's say, a braid or a mono mode. All right, so you know what? I'm gonna say that cast is probably just as far as pretty much most of the casts done on the #1 braid setting. So honestly, I don't know what David's experience is, but it looks like there's really not much of a difference in any of these modes as far as distance and spool control. So let's switch to a lighter lure. Okay, so we switched up to a little 1/4 ounce Lucky Craft square bill, and let's see what this thing can do with a lure on the lighter end of the spectrum. Probably lighter than anything you would throw for the intended species of sea bass or rockfish. But we are still on the fluorocarbon mode, and then we're going to work our way down. All right, no problem in fluorocarbon mode. A couple more casts. Going out there probably like 35 yards. So it's definitely capable of handling this light of a lure. And I suspect with the lighter powered rod, it would handle it even easier. So let's go down to the #3 braid setting. Okay, so that was kind of a miscast on my end. Thumb kind of slipped off early on that cast, but it handled that no problem. All right, let's do a couple more on #3. So I can definitely feel that the brakes kick in really strong towards the end there. Now that I'm paying attention, it's almost like the special night mode of the original Exsence DC. So let's test that theory out. I'm gonna try to cast and not use my thumb to stop the spool once the lure hits the water. Here we go. Well, yeah, kind of works like the SP mode of the original Exsence DC, but it only appears to work with the lighter lures because, yeah, with the heavier lure, spinning the spool up really fast, I definitely had to stop the spool with my thumb once that lure hit the water. So let's go to #2. Okay, spool still unfazed, distance about the same. All right, let's do one more. Yep, distance is about the same. So let's see if the #2 mode can cast thumb free for the most part like the #3 setting. Here we go. Kinda, sorta, but yeah, it seems like this Exsence DC SS is made for spool control, it seems like. Even though, you know, these reels are designed for long casts using braided line. Okay, so let's go to the #1 brake setting, which is for your heavier lures. Now in the Scorpion DC, going down this low was a no-no with the lighter lures for the most part, but let's see what the Exsence can do. Okay, distance may be just a couple of feet farther. Spool handled it, no problem. No problem at all. Okay, we'll do a couple more casts. Okay, that might have been the longest cast so far. Probably about 35 yards. All right, one last cast with this 1/4 ounce square bill, and then we're gonna go home and talk about my thoughts on this. Now, if you guys think that the lure is casting farther in the #1 mode for either this lure or the heavier lure, then let me know. But visually here, I don't see that much of a difference. It's almost like, once again, this reel needs a 0 setting or a 0.5 setting.
Okay, so I'm back from out on the water, and I wrote down all my observations out there. And let's go over them right now, starting with this one, and this one is probably the most surprising. And that is the fact that this cheap eBay braid didn't bleed any color all over this reel or my rod, and that's a big shock, because a few years ago I bought some really expensive braid. I think it might have even been Sunline, and on the first cast it started bleeding color all over the place. But as you can see, I just took the reel off the rod and you don't see any orange color anywhere on this reel. So yeah, I fully expected this braid to start bleeding really bad from the first cast, but it didn't. And once again, it is this Hercules brand braid, and once again it is the 40 pound. It's supposed to be the 8 strand, and you can get this on eBay in bulk for really cheap. Now the second thing I observed was that all 4 of the brake settings seem to be pretty redundant. And what I mean by that is that it didn't matter if I was on braid setting 1, 2, or 3, or going to the fluorocarbon mode, they all seem to cast about the same distance and have the same spool control. Now I do think that the number 1 braid setting casts just a little bit farther than the number 2 or number 3 braid setting, but it seemed to be about the same as the fluorocarbon setting. So yeah, that is very strange. Switching from one setting to the other didn't really seem to make a big change in the casting distance or the spool control. Okay, so on to the next observation, and that is that I feel that this Exsence SS is over braked, and that's because I literally was able to bottom out the brakes on this reel, casting both that 1/2 ounce topwater and that 1/4 ounce square bill, and I still had 0 spool control issues. In fact, I can probably count maybe less than 3 times where I did see a couple of loops forming during a cast, but then they quickly disappeared. And that is something that I cannot do on any of my other DC reels. There was always at least 1 or 2 or 3 brake settings on my other DC reels that are too low and would cause the spool to explode. And apparently that's not the case with this Exsence. So this next observation kind of ties in with the observation of it being over braked, and that is that I really wasn't that impressed with the overall maximum distance of this Exsence SS. Now sure, there were some casts with the 1/2 ounce topwater that were approaching 50 yards, but there are a lot of non-DC reels that can cast that far as well. And I am 99% sure that both of my Scorpion DCs, as well as my CURADO and SLX DCs, could outcast the Exsence. And that's because, once again, I was able to bottom these brakes out, so there was literally nothing else I could do to loosen the reel up to make it cast farther, because the spool tension was already set to loose. So literally the only thing you can do, at least in my experience, to cast farther with this Exsence is to use a longer rod, probably some thinner braid, or do some kind of a pendulum cast out on the water, which of course is not very practical. Now of course, with my other DC reels, there was always at least 1 or 2 or 3 settings that I could dial the brakes down to. Now while they would more than likely overrun the spool, I could use my thumb to modulate that and get some longer casts. So yeah, I wasn't really impressed with the distance on this Exsence SS. So to wrap this video up, let's talk about the Exsence versus the CURADO DC. And I'm bringing up this comparison because, for one, in my mind, the Exsence was basically a JDM version of the CURADO DC. At least that's what I thought before I got this reel to test. And then number 2, right now on Digitaka, the price of the Exsence SS is right around $250. So virtually the same price as the CURADO. So these two reels are natural competitors with each other. Now, the bad news is that after I finished the casting impressions portion for the Exsence, I actually planned on doing a measured cast battle between these two, using the line counter and casting like a 1/2 ounce frog. But unfortunately, when it came to the CURADO's turn. The very first cast I did with it, the frog snapped off somehow and it flew off into the water, and unfortunately I didn't bring any backup frogs. Now you would think I would have learned my lesson after doing this for like 4 years, but apparently not. So I apologize for anyone who was hoping to see a CURADO DC versus Exsence cast battle, but I will tell you this. I am 99% sure that the CURADO DC will outcast this Exsence, especially since that CURADO has that extreme distance mode. So if you're looking for ultimate casting distance, I would go with the CURADO, but if you're looking for a DC reel that is better behaved, then I would go with the Exsence. You'll lose casting distance, but you will gain much more spool control. But don't worry, the CURADO DC is going to be going into battle against another DC reel in the very near future. Okay guys, I hope you enjoyed the on the water casting impressions video for the Exsence DC SS. And once again, thank David for allowing me the opportunity to show you what this reel can do. So with that being said, I'm going to be packing this reel up and sending it back to David, along with a little thank you gift. I'm going to be re-gifting a gift I got from Japan Lure Shop, and I hope David can make better use of this Vision 110 than I will. And hopefully David will chime in the comment section and let us know if his experience with this reel was any different than mine. Alright guys, thanks a lot.